Every single day, without fail, he plunged a worn rag into a pan of boiling oil, dried it under the blazing sun, and carved runes into it, using nothing but his own blood. This went on for months, a quiet, obsessive ritual that no one understood, until the day his master stood at the edge of death. Only then did he finally reach into his robes and pull out what he'd spent so long preparing. "Master, enter the banner of 10,000 souls, quickly." But Zhang didn't look touched. He looked offended. "You fool. My cultivation is 3 full tiers above yours. That pathetic rag could never contain me." The more he spoke, the angrier he got, furious enough to almost strike his own disciple down on the spot. But then Tur said something that made the old man go completely still. "This banner wasn't forged to imprison you. It was forged through killing, pieced together from fragments of shattered souls. Its only purpose is to capture and sustain. You'll enter on your own terms, and as long as you're not reduced to nothing, there's still hope. Maybe one day you'll reach enlightenment, become immortal, and rebuild yourself a body." Silence. Then Zhangling's voice came back sharp and scornful. "You coward. Where's the ruthlessness I taught you? If word gets out that you're carrying a banner of 10,000 souls at this level, do you have any idea what that makes you? A walking target? You'd be inviting your own death." Tur didn't flinch. "Master, will you enter or not?" A long pause stretched between them. Then, with a slow exhale that carried the weight of a lifetime, Zhangling let go. A wisp of verdant smoke rose from his body, shifting, curling, and drifted toward the banner like a departing breath. Tur's voice rang out clear and sharp. "Capture." The banner trembled. In an instant, it swallowed the soul whole. A ghostly face surfaced on the fabric, and then, to Tur's surprise, Zhangling's voice came through with something that almost sounded like wonder. "This artifact, the soul-nourishing effect inside it, how is it this refined?" He was certain that even he, with all his experience, couldn't have achieved results this precise using the same materials, and that realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The banner of 10,000 souls thrives on yin energy, on death. Most forgers simply let it feed passively, but Tur had gone deeper. He'd condensed that death energy deliberately, restructuring the forging method from the inside out. The result was something that shouldn't have been possible at his level. Zhangling, floating somewhere between pride and disbelief, found himself thinking, this kid might actually make it. But before that thought could settle, he watched Tur press a finger against his own corpse. "What are you doing? You're turning my body into a zombie?" Tur glanced over without a hint of guilt. "You shouldn't go to waste, master." Zhangling was speechless. Absolutely, completely speechless. A few days later, Tur packed his master's bones into his storage bag with the same casual efficiency someone might use to pack rice. He was nearly out the door, ready to begin his own path, when a voice stopped him cold. "Tur, where do you think you're going?" He'd almost forgotten. His master wasn't entirely dead. Zhangling assumed the next move was obvious. Head into the mountains, gather limsy mushrooms, spend a decade slowly crafting a breath condensation pill to advance through the Breath Spirit Palace. A long road, but a safe one. Tur shook his head. "I'm not spending 10 years on that." "Then the blood refining method?" Zhangling's tone shifted instantly. "Kill enough people, and the resentment will draw every orthodox cultivator within range straight to you. At your current level, that's a death sentence." Tur was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, almost casually, "Master, what's the difference between a man and a beast?" Zhangling stared at him. "You want to use beast blood? That's been tried. The Ghost Master himself warned against it. Beast blood warps the soul. It turns you into something that's neither human nor ghost. The texts mention the taboo. None of them explain why." Tur's voice was calm, but the intention behind it was anything but. "I want to understand what's actually in beast blood that drives cultivators mad. If I can identify the cause, maybe I can remove it. No one has solved that in 1,000 years. Maybe someone has, and they kept it quiet." He paused. "If I only walk the paths others already carved, how will I ever reach immortality?" Zhangling had no answer for that. He went silent, and somewhere inside the banner, he made peace with a thought he hadn't expected. "I can't teach this one. I'll just have to wait and see how far he goes." Tur found 4 wild wolves in the forest not long after. He needed test subjects. He also needed to be careful. As a cultivator at the Breath Spirit Palace, he still had a mortal body, so he opened his storage bag and let his master render one final service. The zombie lurched forward at the sound of the bell, tail, throwing itself into the snarling pack. It took damage, flesh tearing, wounds accumulating, but Tur rang the bell without mercy, pushing it forward again and again. He watched with the cold focus of someone running an experiment, not someone watching their master's body get mauled by wolves. Eventually, the zombie won. Tur tossed 2 of the wolves to it as compensation for the wear, then got to work on the others, bleeding them, extracting the heart's blood, where spiritual energy concentrates most densely. If the blood refining method required spiritually charged blood, then this was where to start. Back at the ruined temple, he refined the blood into pills. Then he needed test subjects, the living kind. As if on cue, footsteps approached outside. A man, a woman, and a small child stepped into the temple. The man nearly turned back the moment he saw the skinned wolf carcasses, but the woman clenched her jaw and pushed forward. "Brother, could you spare some broth or even gruel? Our child hasn't eaten in 3 days." Tur looked at them for a moment. Then, "Sit down, help yourselves." He cooked the wolf meat into soup and distributed it without another word. The couple drank quickly, burning their mouths and not caring, then passed the rest to the child. Color slowly returned to all 3 of their faces. Tur watched them, quietly, carefully. Something didn't add up. The man's clothes, the fabric wasn't ordinary. The woman's hands were too soft for someone who'd been sleeping in the wild. He asked simply where they'd come from. The man hesitated, then explained. They were from Queetson. That morning, district officials had issued a sudden order. 3,000 virgin boys and girls were to be gathered and sent to the school of the Green Cloud Sword for training. Unable to accept losing their child, the family had fled under cover of darkness. Tur's eyes narrowed. The Green Cloud Sword School was the foremost orthodox sect in the world. Their disciple selection process was notoriously strict and deliberate. Forcing a mass conscription of 3,000 children overnight wasn't their style. It reeked of something else entirely. A demonic cultivator, perhaps, operating behind a borrowed name. He filed the thought away. Queeson was far. This wasn't his problem. By the 5th morning, the ruined temple had become something between a laboratory and a madhouse. 2 wild boars, several small birds in a cage, and Tur, crouched over a burlap sack covered in detailed notes, stuffing blood pills into the animals' mouths one by one. Jiaokuo, the man from the family, had woken up to this scene and immediately felt his stomach growl. He didn't dare ask for food again, but Tur noticed and offered him a deal. Help record the animals' reactions and eat whatever was simmering in the pot. Jiaokuo grabbed the sack and got to work. Tur headed back into the mountains. He needed more test subjects, and the data wouldn't collect itself. Behind him, Zhangling's voice drifted from the banner. "What are you actually planning with that family? Are they test subjects too?" Tur paused, turned the question over, then, almost amused, "Master, shouldn't you be resting? Why are you worrying about trivialities?" "Because you're going to expose yourself," Zhangling said, sharper now. "Queeson might feel distant, but the Green Cloud Sword School's sword control technique is unmatched. Their cultivators can cover any distance in an instant. If they come looking, I won't harm them." Tur's voice was simple, final, a pause. "Then why did you help them?" Tur thought about it for exactly 1 second. "Because I wanted to." Zhangling fell silent. He floated deeper into the banner without another word, struck, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, by just how naturally demonic cultivation came to this boy. Following his heart, acting on desire, no justification, no guilt, no performance, just pure, unfiltered intent. This one, Zhangling thought, was born for this path. That evening, Tur returned to find the temple in chaos. Both boars lay on the ground, blood seeping from every opening. The birds had lost most of their feathers, scattered across the cage floor. The deaths hadn't been peaceful. Whatever happened, it had been violent and agonized. Jiakuo's notes told the story. In their final moments, both the boars and the birds had entered a state of frenzy, biting, thrashing, making sounds eerily close to wolf howls. They'd torn at themselves and anything nearby until their bodies gave out. Tur read the notes slowly. Then the answer clicked. The blood pills still carried residual wolf souls. When ingested by another species, that foreign soul didn't integrate, it consumed, body and mind alike, devoured from the inside until nothing was left. The blood refining method's true requirement wasn't just spiritually charged blood. It required the same species devouring each other. To confirm it, he only needed one more test. He went back into the mountains that night and hunted until he found a lame wolf limping through the undergrowth. He placed the pill carefully in its mouth, stepped back, and waited. 2 hours. Then the wolf lunged, not stumbling, lunging. The injured paw barely slowed it. The wolf, that had been half dead, was now ferocious, eyes wild, energy pouring off it in waves. The residual soul hadn't destroyed it. It had only made it more of what it already was. Tur burst out laughing. Then immediately, Zhangling's voice, sharp and urgent. Quiet. Hold your breath. Tur obeyed without thinking. A streak of light cut across the sky, gone in an instant, disappearing past the horizon like a falling star. Except it wasn't a star. That's a flying sword, Zhangling said quietly. Green Cloud Sword School. Whoever's controlling it is at least at the stage of profound perception. One glance and they could take your head. Tur stood perfectly still until dawn. The sky didn't light up again. When it was finally safe, he looked back at the lame wolf. Still prowling, still aggressive, the injured paw nearly healed, and felt something that wasn't quite fondness, but wasn't far from it either. If I ever actually reach the top of this path, he told the wolf, you'll have played your part in getting me there. He tossed the remaining blood pill fragments into the water. Then he turned and walked away. The answer was his. Purge the residual bestial soul from the heart's blood, and the blood refining method could be used with beast blood safely. It was a problem that had gone unsolved for 1,000 years, and Tur had cracked it in days. Not by following the paths others had laid down, by going straight to the root. In the days that followed, Tur barely surfaced from his research. Books, runes, traced endlessly across the ground. Scrolls cross-referenced against each other until the patterns became clear. Zhao Kuo, who had boasted of reading thousands of texts in his life, watched silently and understood almost nothing of what he saw. On the 5th day, Tur suddenly laughed, loud and sharp, the sound of something finally snapping into place. He went straight to the cauldron. Fire lit. Beast blood poured in. A thick, fetid smell immediately rolled through the temple, sending Zhao Kuo and his family scrambling outside. Tur didn't notice. He was already working. He followed the same method as before, but this time, when the beast blood pills were finished, he didn't reach for the gourd. He reached for the banner of 10,000 souls. He bit his fingertip and pressed it to the fabric, and then, with deliberate, exhausting precision, he began carving runes, one after another, his spiritual energy draining with every stroke. His face drained to white. His hands trembled, but he didn't stop. Hundreds of runes, each one exact. When the final stroke was complete, he could barely hold himself upright, but he held the gourd over the banner, tipped it forward, and let every last beast blood pill pour onto its surface. The moment the pills hit the banner's surface, tiny glimmers of light scattered free, residual beast souls drifting loose from the blood pills like smoke, and then the banner pulled them in one by one, absorbing every last trace. Tur clenched his fist. It worked. But before the satisfaction could fully settle, a furious roar exploded from inside the banner. "You dare use me as bait?" Tur winced. "Master, I simply didn't have enough material to forge a second banner." "Don't be angry," he added quickly. "Those souls weren't for you. They were never a threat." In truth, Zhangling wasn't afraid of a few stray beast souls. What had enraged him was being used without being asked. Still, when he realized the souls posed no real danger to him, he scattered them with a single contemptuous slap, purging the pills of every last trace of residual consciousness. Tur carefully collected the cleansed pills and returned them to the flask. 3 days later, the animals that had consumed the new batch showed no signs of madness, no frenzy, no deterioration, just normal, healthy beasts going about their lives. Even Zhangling, floating somewhere inside the banner, couldn't hold back. That kid, he actually solved it. The blood refining method, he actually solved it. The implications were staggering. Countless demonic techniques required massive quantities of human blood to practice, methods so powerful that most cultivators accepted the cost as unavoidable. But if beast blood could replace it, those techniques could be used freely, without the trail of corpses, without drawing the wrath of every orthodox sect within range. Then Zhangling caught himself himself. But if beast blood works, he turned the thought over slowly. Is this still the demonic path at all? He didn't have long to dwell on it. Tur stepped out of the ruined temple and said something that nearly stopped Zhangling's non-beating heart. Master, I'm going to Quisen. The silence that followed was deafening. Have you lost your mind? Zhangling's voice cracked through the banner. A demon is running loose in Quichin, slaughtering people while wearing the Green Cloud Sword School's name like a mask. And the real Sword School's cultivators have been heading that direction for days. Orthodox and demonic forces are both converging on that city. If you walk in there, I need beast blood, Tur said simply. A lot of it. The beast blood pills are weaker than human blood pills. I need volume to compensate. Only a city like Quichin has enough livestock trade to meet that need. Zhangling wasn't finished. And if you're carrying me, a banner of 10,000 souls, that's irrefutable proof of your demonic identity. The moment any sword sect cultivator spots it, you're dead. There's no talking your way out of that. He truly could not see how Tur intended to deceive trained swordsmen. But even he couldn't have predicted what Tur said next. He wanted to leave the banner with Zhao Kuo's family. Keep it hidden. Come back for it. Once his cultivation had advanced enough to protect himself. A long silence stretched from inside the banner. The kind of silence that meant acceptance, even when the words wouldn't come. Tur was about to say something that might have almost resembled comfort, when Zhangling's voice returned, quiet and strange. You insignificant little demon, you're not ready to leave school yet. Before Tur could respond, something extraordinary happened. Countless black shadows poured out of the banner of 10,000 souls and surged into the surrounding mountains like a tide, and then vanished, absorbed into the very fabric of the air itself. Tur stood frozen, staring. When it was over, Zhangling's voice returned, much weaker than before, but unmistakably satisfied. I've scattered my demonic energy. What's left inside this banner now reads as a natural spiritual artifact. Fortune energy, not demonic cultivation. The leader of the Green Cloud Sword School himself could examine it and find nothing suspicious. A pause. But it can only sustain me for 3 years at best. Tur's throat tightened. Master, if you reach the Taoist core stage in 3 years, you might find a way to save me. Now stop wasting time. Another pause. Shorter this time. Don't bother me unless you're about to die. I'm sleeping. And then silence. The banner hung white and still, like it had never contained anything at all. Tur stared at it for a long moment. Then something occurred to him. A disguise so natural he almost laughed at the simplicity of it. He would enter Quisen as a Taoist fortune teller. He set up a stall on a busy street, hung a sign advertising readings at 10 coins per session, and waited. Quisen was gripped by fear and rumors, the perfect environment for people desperate to know their futures. But for the first several hours, no one came to him. Eventually, a figure sauntered over. A well-known local thug named Wang Pobi, broad-shouldered and smirking, clearly there to make a scene rather than seek wisdom. He wanted Tur to guess his surname. The crowd gathered without being asked, already sensing entertainment. Tur met the man's smirk with perfect calm, then raised the stakes entirely. For this first prediction, I'll charge only 1 coin. If I'm right, you pay me 1 coin. If I'm wrong, I'll pay you back 100 times over. The crowd held its breath. Wang Pobi's smirk widened. Even if this fraud got lucky once, he could just keep betting and drain the man dry. Not far away, a woman, cool-eyed, elegant, watching everything with measured attention, observed silently from the edge of the crowd. Tur pretended to count on his fingers, tilted his head. Then, with absolute certainty, "Your surname is Wang." The crowd erupted. Wang Pobi's smirk flickered, but he steadied himself. "One lucky guess." "Again," he said. "For the second reading," Tur said pleasantly, 2 coins. "For the third, 4. Each one doubles. If I'm ever wrong, I'll pay you 100 times the wager." Wang Pobi's eyes lit up. He thinks doubling from 2 coins is manageable. He accepted immediately. What followed was humiliating. Tur named Wang Pobi's exact date of birth, described the number of people in his household, casually mentioned the color of his dog. Every single one correct. Wang Pobi's expression shifted through disbelief, fury, and then something approaching genuine fear, all while the crowd pressed in closer with every answer. By the 18th prediction, the bully's face had gone white. "You've lost 18 consecutive bets," Tur said, almost apologetically. "That comes to 524,000? 287 coins. Would you like to continue? The crowd gasped. Someone did the math out loud. The exponential doubling, starting from a single coin, had somehow ballooned into a sum that would bankrupt a merchant family. Wang Pobi stared at him with the hollow eyes of a man watching the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Swindler!" he snarled and bolted. Tor didn't chase him. Instead, he turned to the crowd with an easy smile. "Thank you all for your patience. To make it up to you, the rest of today's readings are free." The street erupted in applause. For the rest of the day, people swarmed the stall asking about wealth, marriage, family, futures. Tor read every single one without missing a beat. Not because he could see fate, but because he'd learned, long before any of this, how to read people. An old man asking for offspring predictions. A young husband asking about a barren marriage. Someone seeking wealth who fidgeted with a ring they couldn't afford to lose. Each one telegraphed everything with their posture, their word choices, their desperation. Tor gave them back their own truths, dressed as cosmic revelation, and they walked away calling him a living god. By sunset, his total earnings came to exactly 1 coin, but his reputation, that would be worth far more. He left the stall feigning spiritual exhaustion, already calculating how quickly the name Divine Seer would travel through Quiesen. The truly wealthy, the ones who could actually fund his research, would come to him, drawn by the story, pulled in by the legend. Just as he was returning to the small hut he'd rented at the edge of the city, a figure appeared at the door. Wang Pobi, the same thug who'd stormed off cursing him hours earlier, now stood with his head bowed and his hands clasped respectfully. "Master Taoist, I acted the part well today, I hope. My father is gravely ill, you promised." Without a word, Tor reached into his robes and pressed a medicine pill into the man's palm. Wang Pobi looked down at it like it was sacred. He promised, with the awkward sincerity of someone completely unused to sincerity, that he would change his ways entirely. Tor watched him go with a quiet smile. Then a sound stopped him cold. A subtle displacement in the air, barely a whisper. He spun around. She was already there. The woman from the street, the one who had been watching, standing close enough that if she'd wanted him dead, she already would have been. His hand moved instinctively to the banner beneath his robes. Before he could speak, she did. "I have a question." Her voice was measured, unhurried. "I mean no harm." He forced his expression into calm. "May I ask who you are?" 11th Dawn, of the Green Cloud Sword School. His grip on the banner tightened so hard his knuckles ached. She continued without missing a beat. "I've been observing you for some time. I suspect you may have information connected to the child abductions in this city." Tor breathed carefully. "I think you overestimate me. I'm just a wandering cultivator who's barely broken through the mental concentration stage. That's precisely what confuses me." She tilted her head slightly. "Mastering true divination requires at minimum the stage of penetrating mystery. And yet your predictions today were flawless for dozens of people in a row. You couldn't have arranged that. So what are you actually doing?" Then, before he could answer, she shifted entirely. "The side effects of the blood refining method aside, I imagine the breath condensation pill would be far more practical for your advancement. A single dose to break through cleanly." Tor's eyes sharpened. He kept his expression neutral. "A pill like that would certainly help. Unfortunately, those materials are nearly impossible to source." "I don't have the pill," she said, "but I have the materials to make one." A pause. "Satisfy my doubts about you, and they're yours." The offer hung between them. Tor considered it for exactly 1 second. Then he gestured toward the door. Inside, she placed several flasks of refined jade on the table, top-quality alchemy materials that would have taken years to accumulate through normal means. The Green Cloud Sword School, the world's foremost orthodox sect, clearly had resources that made the rest of the cultivation world look impoverished. Tor settled across from her, and then, plainly without performance, he explained exactly what he'd done on that street. He hadn't predicted anyone's fate. He'd read them. An old man asking about heirs meant a family without sons. A young man with the same question meant daughters only or no children at all. People asking about wealth showed their anxieties and how they held their hands. People asking about safety were already afraid of something specific. You give vague affirmations and let them fill in the rest, he said. They recognize themselves in what you say and mistake you for someone who already knew. It's not divination, it's observation. Dawen stared at him for a long moment. If you wish to manipulate someone, she said slowly, I suspect even superior cultivation wouldn't be enough to protect them from you. Then something shifted in her expression, a decision being made. I need your help investigating the child abductions. I've been working this case for days, and I have nothing. The city's power structures are too tangled. She paused, then added something she didn't quite explain fully. Something about a hexagram drawn by the sect elders before she left. One that had predicted both a sworn enemy and a benefactor waiting for her on this journey. Tur wanted to decline. He had the materials already. He had no obligation, but an alliance with an orthodox sect, even a loose one, could open doors that brute cultivation never would. Free resources, future discounts, and possibly a path to saving his master that he hadn't considered yet. I'll help, he said, but first, let me make the breath condensation pill. She considered it, then nodded. She even summoned her flying sword to carry them both to her cultivation cave outside the city, then offered him her old alchemy manuals for reference without being asked. Tur set up an energy concentration circle in the cave. Dawen moved to assist, then stopped. The formation he was drawing was nothing like anything she'd been taught. She watched it take shape with growing curiosity, and when it was finished, the spiritual energy it gathered surpassed her own circles by a visible margin. I removed redundant incantations, Tur explained simply, noticing her expression. The structure is cleaner. The efficiency goes up. She opened her mouth to ask more, but then the wind changed. Both of them went still at the same moment. Something foul and cold moved through the air. Beneath it, unmistakably, the sound of children crying, woven together with something worse. Hollow, distant moaning, like voices that had already passed beyond the point of pain. They exchanged one look and moved. The valley appeared after barely a few minutes of travel. They stood at its edge and looked down, and neither spoke for a long moment. More than 100 bodies, scattered across the valley floor in various stages of decay. Some barely recognizable, others still holding a human shape. The range of decomposition made the timeline clear. This hadn't happened recently. It had been happening for a long time. Every single corpse had the chest torn open, the hearts removed. Dawen's voice came out flat and controlled, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Blood refining, a demonic cultivator using human blood to concoct elixirs. The words landed on Tur's skin like cold water. He already knew what blood refining was. He had been refining blood himself, carefully, methodically, working to make it safer. But standing at the edge of a pit filled with children's bodies, the gap between his approach and this felt like the distance between a surgeon and a butcher. Even he couldn't look at it without something tightening in his chest. He steadied himself. Miss Dawen, given the state of the bodies, most of these deaths are days old at minimum. The cultivator may not still be nearby. It doesn't matter. She raised her right hand and sword light poured from her fingers. Thousands of threads weaving through the air above the pit like a net cast over still water. The threads blurred, too fast even for Tur's spirit eye to fully track, then collapsed into cascading runes and burst apart like fireworks. What remained when the light faded was a single luminous path pointing northeast. 300 meters northeast, she said. The demon is still close. Tur already dreaded the next sentence. I'm going after them. He moved immediately. Miss Dawen, please reconsider. The risks are significant, and I can't guarantee your safety in a direct confrontation. Eliminating demons is the duty of our sect. She reached up without hesitation. 3 streaks of white light shot from her palm and buried themselves in Tur's hand before he could react. Sword talismans. Remain here in meditation. 3 days at most. 5 if necessary. I'll return. She touched the ground with one foot and transformed into a beam of light that tore through the air and vanished into the northeast before Tur had finished drawing breath. He stood there holding 3 sword talismans, staring at the sky, completely alone. Miss Dawen, he called out to no one. 3 talismans really isn't very prudent. From inside the banner, which was supposed to be sleeping, Zangling's voice drifted out, quiet and almost melancholy. A pity, that girl has no experience fighting someone like him. Tur blinked. Master, why are you awake? I told you to rest. Then he clutched his chest dramatically. I should have asked her for more talismans while I had the chance. If she had agreed, and then the worst happened, I could have given her a proper burial and inherited her celestial treasures. Dead silence from the banner. Why would you sleep while she's still alive? Zangling said finally, his voice flat with disbelief. After death, one sleeps forever. I was only being cautious, Tur said. The moment you spoke earlier, you nearly gave everything away. A natural spirit artifact doesn't have the voice of an old man. If anything, it should sound like a jade sword. You staying quiet was the right call. Don't be cocky, boy. But there was no real bite in Zangling's voice. It softened into something almost reluctant. I woke because I wanted to warn you. This place isn't ordinary. A cultivator who practices blood refining doesn't simply abandon a pit of bodies. Flesh and bones are prime materials. Residual souls are even more precious. Nothing gets wasted. Not willingly. Tur had already been thinking the same thing. His eyes moved slowly across the valley below. This pit wasn't abandoned, he said. It's being used for something. There's likely something hidden down there. Zangling's voice came back sharp with sudden enthusiasm. Then what are you waiting for? Get down there and look. Tur hesitated. If I recover demonic treasures from that pit and she comes back to find me holding them, she'll take my head off without asking questions. A pause from the banner. Then, carefully, Zangling floated out a new idea. You could always hide them first and reveal them later. Perhaps through marriage? Tur went very still. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. He stroked his chin thoughtfully, turning over the image of Dawn standing in the dim cave. Composed, precise, luminously beautiful, in the way of someone who'd never wasted a single day of their life. Master, he said, with great solemnity, you might actually be a genius. Another pause. Do you think I still have a chance? Zangling's voice drifted out from the banner, dry as old parchment. You're dreaming, boy. If you ever set foot inside the Azure Sword sect, the heart examination alone would destroy you. Every malevolent thought laid bare, and you'd be reduced to dust before you even introduced yourself. Tur didn't argue. He couldn't. Everything his master said was true, but a salted fish still has the right to dream. And deep in his heart, quietly, he planted a seed, the idea of an alliance through marriage, and let it sit there undisturbed. Zangling, watching him drift into thought, snapped impatiently. What are you standing there for? Go find the treasure. Tur shook his head. Not yet. Why not? It's right there. I just obtained top quality materials for the breath condensation pill, Tur said calmly. Cultivation comes first. The treasure can wait. If I break through in the next few days, I'll have everything I need. If I get distracted now and something goes wrong, I lose both. He paused. And if Miss Dawn returns before I get the chance, then the treasure simply wasn't meant for me. That's fine too. Zangling made a noise that communicated several layers of frustration, then sank back into the banner without another word. Tur didn't even glance at the valley as he turned and walked back to the cave. He set up the cauldron with practiced efficiency, laying his traps at the entrance and carving a clear warning line just inside the door. Do not approach, before lighting the fire. The breath condensation pill wasn't a complicated formula. He'd studied it thoroughly enough that his hands moved almost on their own. Auxiliary herbs added together, brought to a slow simmer, and then, at exactly the right moment, the drop of celestial mystery elixir. The moment it touched the heat, the cauldron changed. A natural vortex formed inside without any prompting, spiraling slowly, drawing the essence of every herb into itself. It was a sign of exceptional ingredient quality. Lower grade materials required constant attention, careful temperature management, 3 hours of unbroken stirring without a single lapse in focus. The kind of task that ended careers when someone blinked at the wrong moment. But premium ingredients did the work themselves. Tur found himself with nothing to do and sat down anyway. He didn't wander. He didn't explore. He stayed exactly where he was and watched the cauldron with the full weight of his attention, because he'd read enough novels in his past life and heard enough of his master's cautionary tales in this one to know that catastrophe didn't announce itself. It arrived during the single moment someone decided they could afford to relax. 3 hours passed. The liquid in the cauldron vanished. Rising slowly above the rim, catching the light like carved jade, came a pill of deep, unusual green, tiny and perfect. And when he leaned in close, he could see it, a miniature vortex turning inside it, like a spiritual ocean caught in glass. He swallowed it without ceremony and sat cross-legged. The pill dissolved almost instantly and moved downward, guided by his consciousness, settling into the center of his energy. What was already held there responded immediately, coiling around it, rotating, accelerating with every turn. The vortex tightened, quickened, then gradually began to weaken. A lesser cultivator would have panicked here, mistaking the dissipation for failure. Tur didn't move. His master had taught him the fundamentals, even recited from dry texts. And the most important lesson was this: the moment the vortex collapses is the moment that decides everything. He released control entirely. Even his consciousness loosened, stopped directing, became something passive. A current pulled into a much larger motion, and then he felt it, vast and sudden, like stepping off solid ground into open ocean. His eyes snapped open. Laughter burst out of him, echoing off the cave walls, uncontrolled and genuine. The spiritual ocean had formed. The vortex was gone, replaced by something permanent, deep, and his. From this point forward, he could absorb the energy of heaven and earth continuously, without seated meditation, without rituals. The difference between the breath-spirit stage and the spirit-ocean stage was the difference between carrying water in cupped hands and owning a well. His cultivation speed had just increased 100-fold. He sat with it for a moment, feeling the change settle through him. Then his thoughts drifted, and something wistful crept in. At the spirit-ocean stage, most cultivators chose one technique to master completely, because lifespans were finite, and trying to spread that time across too many arts was how people died mediocre. He thought of Dawen's sword technique, the way it moved without incantation, arriving before the eye could track it, and knew without being told that it was the result of years of singular, relentless training. Even if she gave him every sword manuscript the Green Cloud Sword School possessed, he couldn't replicate what she'd built, not from the outside, not without proper transmission. The path to learning that art ran directly through the sect's inner circle, and the only way into that circle, he stroked his chin. Not yet, he decided, but someday. For now, there was a corpse pit to investigate. He made use of the remaining materials first, drawing on memories of his past life to fashion several simple explosive devices from components that in this world no one had thought to combine that way. Then he returned to the valley. The sky had cleared. Warm sunlight fell across the pit, which only made the bodies look worse, the warmth of the light in cruel contrast with what lay beneath it. But Tur had changed since his first weeks in this world. He'd seen enough now that the sight settled into something endurable, if not comfortable. He circled the pit slowly, then drew a pair of twigs from his storage bag, recited an incantation, and ignited them, holding the burning wood like brushes and tracing trigrams around the perimeter in strokes of living flame. His spiritual ocean spun at full speed, feeding him a continuous current of fire energy that felt, for lack of a better description, like being rich for the first time. Spending it freely was almost fun. When the last trigram was complete, the formation activated. A ring of contained fire rose silently around the pit's edge, and the temperature climbed by several degrees. Whatever was down there, the suppression and yang circle would give him a margin of safety. Then he began the real work. The corpse-moving technique was one of the most basic arts in cultivation, but at the awakening stage, it had once drained him completely just to shift a single object. Now, with a full spiritual ocean behind him, he recited the incantation, shaped his hands into pulling gestures, and drew the first body upward. It was clumsy. He could only manage one at a time, and he needed full concentration to hold the spell together. Any slip would scatter it entirely. In a real fight, this would be useless against a cultivator like Dawen. She'd cut him apart before he finished the first syllable. But he wasn't in a fight. He was practicing. And with each pull, the motion came slightly more naturally. The incantation shorter, the grip steadier, the weight of it easier to hold. He was sweating through his robes and wearing a smile he couldn't quite get rid of. Body by body, the pit emptied. And then, at the very bottom, buried under everything, half buried in the earth and dark with grime, something that had no business being there, a Buddha statue. He leaned in. The figure sat cross-legged, blackened by age and staining, its belly rounded and prominent. But even from a distance, something inside it was glowing, a faint, contained light that pulsed like something breathing. Tur crouched at the edge and studied it. Buddhism in this world was strange, fragmented, and deeply entirely suspect. Unlike his past life, no complex tradition had taken root here. No schools, no lineages, no architecture of doctrine. The most prominent Buddhist sect, the Nirvana school, had long been classified alongside the demonic path. Its central teaching that any person, regardless of past crimes, could achieve redemption simply by entering monastic life and setting down their weapons, had infuriated the orthodox cultivators for generations. You murder 100 people and shave your head and that's absolution? The Nirvana school said yes. The orthodox path said otherwise. Neither convinced the other, so eventually they decided with force. The school's founder died in the conflict. The sect fell silent. There had been rumors later of a Nirvana disciple who broke from the tradition entirely, founded something called the Temple of Benevolence, and tried to build something genuinely virtuous from the ruins of a disgraced lineage. But even that small history had faded into rumor. Now, staring at this grime-coated statue at the bottom of a mass grave, Tour could make no certain connection, but his instinct said something unambiguous. This is a trap. He was still reaching for the movement technique when the statue opened its eyes. 2 columns of golden light erupted from the empty sockets like twin strikes of lightning, aimed directly at his face. He threw himself sideways, barely. The beams missed his head but didn't stop. They curved, tracked him, moved like hunting things, sweeping across his body in methodical passes. And then he felt it, an invisible weight settling over his limbs. His reactions half a beat slow, his movements thick and delayed, as if the air itself had thickened around him. Paralysis. He knew immediately what to do. His formation was already set. He reached for the trigger, and the ring of fire roared upward, walls of flame cutting between him and the golden rays, breaking the lock. His body came back to him all at once. He exhaled. Preparation prevents catastrophe every time. Then a sound reached him, distant, almost melodic, fraying at the edges like something trying to pass itself off as sacred. A low chant, building in his ears without a clear source. Lay down the knife. Become Buddha at once. The words were meant to sound holy. They didn't. They sounded like something being worn as a costume. The bones of devotion filled with something else entirely. Something that wanted to get inside him through his ears and stay there. His thoughts blurred. His legs softened beneath him. The chant pressed against the inside of his skull like a hand pushing through wet paper. The statue had risen from the pit and was drifting upward, still chanting, moving toward him with the unhurried patience of something that had done this many times before. Then Zhangling's voice cut through the fog like a blade. Rupture your eardrums! Now! Tour didn't think. His palms struck both ears simultaneously. The sound that followed was enormous, and then immediately absent, replaced by a high, clean ringing, and pain so sharp it nearly folded him in half. Blood ran warm down the sides of his neck. The world tilted, but the chanting was gone. He straightened, reached into his robes, pulled out one of the 3 sword talismans Dawen had pressed into his hand. He pushed his spiritual breath into it. The talisman unfolded in a cascade of white light, brilliant, immediate, and ferocious. It shot toward the demon Buddha like a falling star. The statue's golden eyes flared. 2 beams lashed out to intercept, colliding with the sword light in a crash that sent tremors through the air. For a moment, it looked like the golden rays might hold. They didn't. The sword light punched through, clean and total, and struck the statue across the head. Half of it sheared away, exposing a cross-section of solid gold, gleaming, dense, and clearly valuable, before the talisman spent its last energy and dissolved into ash. The demon Buddha hung in the air, half-faced, neither destroyed nor retreating, and Tur stood across from it, ears bleeding, out of borrowed power. With 2 talismans left, Tur stared at what remained of the demon Buddha, half a face, suspended in the air, its golden eyes dark and still. His eardrums were gone. He couldn't hear a thing. He had no way of knowing if the chanting had stopped. He wasn't willing to find out the hard way. Without hesitation, he drove the 2nd sword talisman forward and hurled one of his handmade bombs in the same motion. The explosion hit first, then the sword light, razor clean, splitting the statue directly down the center. Both halves tumbled from the air and struck the ground, and from the shattered belly of the demon Buddha, a cascade of objects spilled out across the dirt. Tur stayed back, 3rd talisman gripped tight, eyes fixed on the wreckage. He waited, watched for any flicker of spiritual breath, any sign of regeneration. Nothing. The statue's energy had completely dissipated. Only then did he lower himself to the ground and sit, properly sit, the way a man sits when his legs have decided they're done, regardless of what he thinks about it. He pressed a hand to the side of his head and winced. The ruptured eardrums throbbed with every heartbeat, and the silence around him was total and ringing. Minor injury by a cultivator's standards, still unpleasant. He took a slow breath, composed himself, and stood up. The first thing that genuinely stung wasn't the pain. It was the tally. 3 sword talismans. He'd burned 2 of them on a single statue. 1 left. He filed away a mental note. When Darwin returns, find a way to ask for more, and dropped into the pit to assess what he'd won. The haul was substantial, if imperfect. Jade flasks and elixirs lay scattered everywhere, but the explosion had contaminated many of them. Water tainted, rendered useless. Of what remained, the majority were human blood elixirs, useful for condensing spiritual energy, supplementing daily cultivation, healing minor wounds. Convenient, given the state of his ears. He'd set them aside for now. The side effects of blood elixirs weren't something to ignore carelessly. Beyond the elixirs, there were the usual demonic odds and ends. Poison antidotes, poison delivery tools,